Conditional statements are an important type of statement that we want to look at pretty closely. You would write this if P, then Q. Sometimes you don't write the then, but you would use a comma. Any conditional statement represented by if P, then Q, or by if P, comma Q, your P statement, the part that's with the if, is called the antecedent. The Q statement is called the consequent. We would write this P arrow Q, where you're always pointing from the antecedent to the consequent. Here we have a few examples of conditional statements. If our school was this nice, I would go there more than once a week. So here, the antecedent is our school was this nice. You leave off the if. And the consequent is I would go there more than once a week. For part B, if you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. The antecedent is you strike me down, again, leaving off the if. The consequent is I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. Looking at C, getting a role in this sitcom implies I'll be paid well. Now this one's not technically an if-then statement, but we can turn it into one. If I get a role in this sitcom, then I'll be paid well. The word implies replaces that if-then. So here our antecedent is getting a role in the sitcom, our consequent is I'll be paid well. Then in part D, we're looking at another one that's kind of written in a different way. It is necessary to score above 1200 on the SAT in order to get into the college I would like to attend. The necessary part is going to be your consequent. So here, if you want to get into the college you would like to attend, then you need to score above 1200 on the SAT. So the necessary part always ends up being that consequent because the other part has to happen first. Now, the word sufficient is going to be the exact opposite. Here, the antecedent will be being a dog. So if you are a dog, then you belong to the class of mammals. So our antecedent, being a dog, our consequent belong to the class of mammals. And then finally, only if a figure is a quadrilateral can it be a square. So that only if is going to replace the then part of the statement. So here, if a figure is a square, then it's a quadrilateral. So some of these weird ones you have to pay a little extra attention. If it's necessary, then that's going to tell you the consequent. What's sufficient is going to tell you the antecedent, and then the only if is going to give you the consequent. If we want to make a truth table for P implies Q, this is the most tricky one that we have. So pay extra careful attention to what makes a true statement, because it just doesn't follow with what we're used to thinking about. Let's look at an advertising slogan first. If you can use a word processor, you can create a web page. That's a conditional statement. The P will be you can use a word processor. The Q would be you can create a web page. Now, there are 4 combinations. They could both be true. If you have a true statement, you can use a word processor and you can create a web page, then that if-then statement would be true. You haven't made any logical mistake. But let's take a look at what happens when your antecedent is true. You can use a word processor. But the consequent is false. You can't create a web page. That means that that advertisement was giving you false information because you could use a word processor, but you couldn't create a web page. So that advertisement was incorrect. Now, the other 2 combinations are the ones that really mess up students. If the antecedent is false, and in this case, you cannot use a word processor, but you can create a web page. Well, here, the advertisement didn't say anything about if you don't know how to use a word processor, what would happen. So the advertisement didn't do anything incorrect. They did not cause you to have something that was false. So a false antecedent and a true consequence is just assumed to be true because no false statement had actually been made. The overall statement had not been violated. And then the last one, if both the antecedent and the consequent is false, again, here, let's look at the entire statement. The company didn't say anything about what would happen if you could not use a word processor. So here we assume it's true again because the advertisement didn't do anything wrong. You just didn't fall into the case that they had. So organizing this in a truth table, you see that the only time you have a false conditional is when the first part was true, but the second part was false. We can look at some examples to determine the truth value. If 2 is an integer, then 2 is a rational number. Well, first look, is 2 an integer? Yes, it is. Is 2 a rational number? Yes, it is. So a true implies true statement is true. If 3 is a negative number, then 5 is greater than 7. Well, 3 is not negative, so that's false. 5 is not greater than 7, so that's false. But overall, this is a true statement. Nothing here was done incorrectly because 3 wasn't a negative number. We didn't talk about what happens if 3 was not a negative number. Then in C, if 5 is greater than 3, then 2 plus 7 is 4. Well, here 5 was in fact greater than 3, but 2 plus 7 is not 4. So here you had a true statement, but then you had a false statement. Overall, this is false because you met the condition for the antecedent, but then the conclusion or the consequent wasn't true. So logically, that is a false statement.